It was a bit of a struggle in the beginning because the way the rules worked, I wasn't allowed to race the high school class until I turned 15.
Jumping on to the 125 years, so when you finished up on the Pro Mini, you went on to the 125 high school class. It must have been pretty awesome to be on a 125, a bigger bike, more power.
Yeah, it was. And at that stage, I was 14 years old, and I was a bit tall for the 85 because it was 80 back in the day, and we didn't have big wheels back then, so I was towering over this little 80. And so I got onto the 125, and it felt so good immediately. Those KTM 125s, I think they'd just become really good, thanks to Langston and all of them develop it. And at that stage, the bike was so good. So I jumped onto that 125 and felt completely at home. And yeah, it was a bit of a struggle in the beginning because the way the rules worked, I wasn't allowed to race the high school class until I turned 15, which was in May.
Okay.
And we tried to get dispensation. I mean, I'd won the Pro Motocross class the year before, so we tried to use that as grounds for pushing me up the class, but they just wouldn't have it. So I had to literally, we went to the first national and sat and watched the national unfold in front of us, and we couldn't do anything about it. I was supposed to be racing, and I couldn't race, so if anything, that fueled the fire even more. And so I had to wait until May to race my first national. And but it was awesome. I mean, going to the bike itself, the bike was amazing. I felt at home immediately.
It had quite a unique rear swing arm, if I can recall. There was no linkage in the swing arm, so shock was bolted directly onto the swing arm.
Yeah,
which had its pros and cons. I think Grant Langston raced that same bike in the European series, and it went incredibly well in sand. That was its really strong point.
Yeah. I think I listened to a podcast with him. I think it was on Gypsy Tales, where he went into extreme detail about this with the PDS shock and stuff. So for me, it was a bit tricky because I'd come from the 80cc straight to the 125 without having anything to gauge. So that was all that I knew. It was exciting because the bike was new and I was young, and it was awesome. And so I didn't really have anything to compare to, but I can remember vividly how good that bike was, and those were solid years.
Now at this point in your life, you're halfway through high school, you're middle of high school. How did you create a balance between this hobby that your heart was in versus schoolwork?
Oh man, there was no balance. That's for sure. There was absolutely no balance. Going back to primary school, even. Every weekend was at the track. Every single weekend. I did not want to. I mean, I enjoyed cricket. I played a bit of cricket. I played a bit of tennis. I trained. I'd started exercising a little bit more for the racing. When I was about 13, I started running a little bit and started doing a little bit of gym work when I was about 15, 16. But it was all motocross. I didn't want anything else to do but motocross.
But you stayed in high school. You didn't homeschool, right?
So my high school, I went to a good high school the first year out of high school. The second year, when I was 15, turning 16, I went to public school.
Okay. And
then halfway through, let me just think. Yeah, so it was halfway through my second year. So I was in grade 10, standard 8. I got the opportunity to start doing some racing in Belgium. Through Van Garnie and tennis. So my parents actually pulled me out of school. So I stopped school just to focus on the racing. And then in 2003, I actually lived in Scotland and was full on racing at 16, 17. And then, to get through school, I finished it through homeschool. Got my matric certificate afterwards.
In the US, that's the way most of these pros, their life ends up going. Jason Anderson, Adamson Sorello, they've been homeschooled before they even get to high school, because the sport is so demanding that it requires almost a full-time commitment from a very young man.
Yeah, and this is the tricky thing with motocross, is that to give your kid, or to have the perfect opportunity to race and become at the top level, you need to make those sacrifices. And anyone in their right mind, if you tell them that you need to take their kid out of school before they've even finished primary school because they've got a talent and stuff, is really risky, man, because there's only one winner at the end of the day, and you can take your kid out of school and hope that they might have this chance of becoming a champion, but the chances are pretty slim. And obviously all these stories that you hear in the mainstream media of how they've sacrificed everything. I mean, there's a lot of talk on the Lawrences on how they sacrificed everything, and it's 100% correct. You have to sacrifice so much. However, there's a lot of stories that are not told of the people that sacrificed and didn't make it. And there's a lot of those. There's a lot of them in South Africa, and it's harder for South Africans because we're so far removed from the rest of the world in terms of the industry and the sport in some aspects.
Sure.
So yeah, it's tricky, but in the States they have access to a lot of things a lot easier than what we do. So and yeah, I mean, it's the whole story of fathers and mothers living the dream through their kids, or whether they have an actual talent to make it that far. But that's another podcast on its own, man. So yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I know my mom hated that I was pulled out of school. She absolutely hated it, and she pushed for us big to get at least amatrix as soon as we could afterwards, which we did. Yeah, it's a tough decision for parents, for sure.
Yeah, so that's 20 plus years of riding, 12 national championships. And yeah, your record speaks for itself.
Yeah, it was a good run. It was a good run. There's a lot of ups and downs that you go through this various path in life, and I wouldn't have changed it for the world. I loved every second of it. I loved being at the track.
Yes,
it's where I felt at home. Yeah, I mean, the smells and the sights and seeing people that you grow up with, and even your competition. I mean, yeah, you see them nearly South Africa not every weekend, but every second weekend. So yeah, it was a good run, and I'm super stoked on how everything went.